Off we go. Welcome to the Wild Grasses of Victoria course. I set big aspirations for myself in this. I've got all of your requests for what you want to get out of the course, those of you who filled in the questionnaire. Thank you for doing that. And I reckon I can do that for all of you. But beyond that, I aspire to making you see the landscape in a different way and understand things at a deeper level. I might not work with everybody, but it's amazing how many people at the end of the course say that it's completely opened their eyes and they see things a different way. So I hope you will experience that. I'm just thinking there's a light that's shining up there. I'll get rid of that. Okay. Now, this course is coming to you from Wurundjeri country. I'm currently in Wurundjeri country, and each of our 3 field sites are also in Wurundjeri country. I think we've got some people from Bunurong land, and Carla and Ross, you'd be in Djadja country, I think. Is that right? Yep, they're nodding. Is there any other mob that we should be recognising?
I'm on Wadawurrung land.
Wadawurrung, yep. Anyone else? Well, wherever we happen to be, I certainly want to acknowledge that we are on Aboriginal country, and I'll pay my respects to elders past, present and future. And if you are a traditional owner, then I'd be really keen to know about that, because I really like to meld my scientific understanding with traditional understanding and do what I can to support the Aboriginal people. So I certainly respect all of the traditional owners and their traditional knowledge. Now I see there's something in the chat window, which is the Wadawurrung for, yes, for Madeline, of course, that makes sense. I have given you a set of various notes and a YouTube video. I'm hoping that most or all of you have been able to view the YouTube video and do the exercises that are in there. I'm going to talk further about the exercise in a minute. You've also got some sets of notes. There will be 2 more sets of notes yet to come. I've given you so far the largest set of notes titled Wild Grasses of Southeastern Australia. Today I'm going to go through essentially sections 2.1 to 2.5, I think it is, regarding the structure of a grass plant. That will be the main focus of this session. And at the end of this session, I'm hoping that you will be well prepared, knowing what to look for on a grass plant and what the main names of the different parts are, so that tomorrow when we go out in the field, I can say, check out the collar of the leaf and so on, and you'll know what part to look at. I'll remind you at any rate, but that's the main purpose of this session, to do that groundwork so that we can get the maximum out of our field trip tomorrow. The notes that Wild Grasses of Southeastern Australia notes also contains a whole lot of stuff which I don't have time to go through in our precious time together. Many moons ago, during this course over its 32-year history, well, this is the 33rd year actually, I became aware that there is no point in telling you stuff that is just as easily read on paper. And we need to spend our precious time together with me showing you things and explaining stuff in a way that can't be satisfactorily done on paper or even on videos. Although I'm finding videos have some real advantages over paper. You will have already discovered, for example, that grasses are singularly unphotogenic. You photograph the grass and you look at the photo and you think, now which grass is it? I tried to photo and I didn't really capture the essential characters of that plant. So I won't dwell on things that you might just as well read. They are in those notes. That's why I've asked you as homework to read through pages 1 to 4 of those notes labelled southeast, no, grasses of southeastern Australia. The shorter notes called key grass species of Victoria notes that I give to even somebody just doing a half-day course. They cover the most commonly encountered grasses. In fact, any grassy area anywhere in Victoria is going to have quite a few, usually an abundance of one or more commonly many of the species that are in there. But there's around 440 species of grass in Victoria, so it can't cover the whole lot. But they are the species which I would like you to be able to identify with some confidence by the time you finish this course. I'm going to teach you how to identify a much broader range of grasses, but at the very base level, I'd like you to be able to recognise the grasses that are in there. Some of them are more important than others. There are a couple of other parameters that I chose for those species that are included there, like that they're the easiest to not be confused with other species about, and they tell you something about the environment in which they're growing. For example, brown top bent is in there because, in part, it tells you that the ground is compacted and there's no point trying to replace it with some nice native species until you deal with the underlying problem of the compacted ground. So that's another criterion for selecting those species. I've also sent you some notes. Well, it's a key to the wallaby grass species, hot off the press. I've revised it as of yesterday, and I will teach you how to use that next Wednesday. I will be showing you some wallaby grasses tomorrow. I think we'll probably see about 7 or 8 species tomorrow, certainly at least 6. Yeah, so we'll see lots of wallaby grasses tomorrow, but in order to identify them methodically, you need to have a botanical key, and some of you have used keys before, a few of you haven't. Those who haven't, or even those who have, won't have used the key quite like the way I've written the key that I've sent you. So I'll show you how to use that. There will be another key for spear grasses to allow you to identify individual species of spear grass. And I noticed that many of you specifically said that you want to go away from this course being able to identify spear grasses and wallaby grasses. I'll show you how to identify them as those genera meaning plural of genus, like wallaby grass or spear grass. And I'll show you how to recognize a whole lot of them as individual species, both in the field, where that's not too difficult, and using these identification keys, which we'll get some practice in. Now, normally I do that indoors and sometimes with a microscope for everybody, and that's a lot better for learning how to use a key. Can't do that with the COVID pandemic on. I do hope to be able to run workshops that will do that sometime next year, maybe early in the year. So we might still do that, but I'll do the best I can at showing you how to use the keys whilst we're together in these webinars. And the last lot of notes that I'm going to send you is a much bigger key to the grasses of Victoria, which gets down to an individual species in many cases, but where we have large groups of grasses, such as the wallaby grasses and the spear grasses, it will just get you to the point where you can say that your grass is one of a few species of wallaby grass or one of the few species of spear grass. And then you use the other keys for that. You won't be able to identify individual species of poa though, because they are quite difficult, and I haven't written a key for those yet. One day I will, but for the moment, I'm with misgivings having to set poas aside for the identification keys, but I will show you a number of species. I think we're going to see one species tomorrow. We'll see several species at Montrose, and we'll see hopefully 1 or 2 other species at Kilsyth South. So they are the notes. There's also the list of participants in this course, the roll if you like, so you can see where people come from. We come from north of the Divide, south of the Divide, well west of Melbourne, and so on. So it's a broad group, and the consultants amongst you, like Georgina and rows will work wherever the money takes them far afield. So I'll try giving you information that's relevant to all the areas that might be of interest to you. Now, I'm hoping that everybody, or at least almost everybody, has looked at that YouTube introductory video. The purposes of that are to give you some basic information to start with, so that when you come to this webinar, you have already been exposed to some of the structural parts of the grass plant and the names that go with them. I'm going to go through that again, but having had that start, this will be a way of reinforcing that and helping cement it into your memory. And probably the main part of giving you the exercises there are to get you to handle the grass plants and focus on the fine details. What I find is that people learning, well, even people who think they know their grasses usually get things wrong and aren't really able to identify even quite different grasses from my perspective, simply because they don't know which parts to be looking at or how to interpret this plant that has structures that are so different from the other plants that they're used to looking at. So that's why we have to spend a bit of time on the structure of the grass plant, and why you do have to handle grass plants and get up close. When we're out in the field, I want you to be handling the grass plants, getting down on your haunches, and sometimes even pulling out root systems, and that'll be principally the introduced species. We're not going to rip out rare species, I can assure you. So I've got you to do that and to handle the grass specimens and think about just how different things are. As I mentioned, most people who might like to learn about grasses just don't even know how to examine the plant and what might be different. The first step was for you to go out and look at these things and think about how different they are. I gave you 3 species to search for, and many of you will have found all 3. I've got all 3 of them just within probably 30 meters of me, if not rather less. And that would be true of most of you, I reckon. Those species were the prairie grass, or Bromus catharticus, short-lived perennial species, large quaking grass, Bryza maxima, and oats. And the one you're likely to have found, if you found any, would be bearded oat, or Avena barbata. So I hope you found at least one of those. That should have been easy. And the remaining task I gave you was to collect at least a couple of species which differed from whichever of those first 3 you've got to the maximum extent in as many different ways. And so there are a whole range of things that might be different. I introduced in the video the structure of the leaf. So you might have looked for something that had runners, for example, which is different from those 3 species that you went searching for. Or there might be other things. Now, we can't go through all 17 of us, well, 18 including me, and I do limit the class to 17 students so that I can respond to everybody individually. But 17 is too many for us all to go through saying what we found. What I'm going to ask instead is for those of you who reckon you've found a real standout, way out there sort of grass that differs from those 3 rather basic grasses to the maximum extent in as many ways as you could possibly find. So do I have a contender for the title of the most different grass specimen? If you want to go in for that title, can you please unmute yourself and show me your specimen if you happen to have it with you? Everybody's shy.
I'll go. I don't know if it's particularly special, but I got I think it might be a Austral saltgrass, Stickless. Is that? Ooh.
It's a good grass. Yeah, hold it up again and I'll look closely. Put it, when you're showing me things, there are 2 ways of getting them in focus. One is to hold them more towards your face, because Zoom is going to try focusing on your face. The other option is to put a piece of white paper behind it so that I'll see it better. So have another crack at that. Okay, a bit closer, please. You'll have to talk to get the focus again.
Oop, maybe it's not going to focus.
That'll do. I think I know what that is. You think it might be a barley grass?
I thought so, but then I've got a barley grass as well, and it's a lot flatter, and that's the barley grass there.
Yep. Perhaps you have two species of barley grass. What I'll ask you to do is to rotate them so that we can see them edge on, because with barley grasses, they've got two broad flat faces and two narrow faces.
Ooh. Hang on.
Bingo. I reckon you've got two different sorts of barley grass there. Now, tell us why you thought that they were different. In what respects are they different?
Well, I see this one a lot more often. I was mowing at the time, so it wasn't like I was mowing this, and I just noticed this one was a lot more compact in form, and the actual little seed capsules themselves are smaller, and it's more like, when you look at it like that, this one seems flat. Like it has two flat sides, whereas this one's more like circular and whorled, I suppose, around there. And the wispy bits stick out a lot more. This is more flattened with the sheath or whatever, and these ones stick out a bit more. So that's what, all
right,
drew my eye to them.
Good. Okay. I think they are both barley grasses. Now, if people want me to identify grass specimens, they can bring them along tomorrow. Just bring them in a plastic bag that's sealed up, because we don't want to spread grass seeds to a site where that species might not already be. But you can bring them along and I'll check. But looking at it on Zoom, they look like two barley grasses. And they're good choices, not so much because of the features that you've described, but rather because barley grass, as the seeds are shed, the whole seed head breaks up from the top down. You'll find that the seeds at the top break off, and a bit of the stem, or the rachis as it's technically called, it falls off with the seeds as well. And so progressively, as the seeds fall, so does the associated bit of the whole seed head, or inflorescence as it's technically called, until when it's finished shedding its seed, there is just the stem on which the seed head started off. So you just end up without the seed head and just the stalk sticking up. That's extremely unusual in Victorian grasses. So there's a distinctive feature that really differs in a profound way from the others. The seeds also are rather different in a big way. Each seed that falls off not only includes a little bit of that stem, or the rachis, running up through the middle of the seed head, it includes 3 spikelets. There's a spikelet in the middle that contains a grain, and there is a spikelet on each side that is sterile. It doesn't produce a grain, and the whole thing falls off as a package. The 2 at the side are really bristly, and they aid dispersal. Now, regularly I'm seeing a flash up of, is it Keith? Somebody's got their microphone not turned off. Turn the microphone off, because otherwise it's intermittently giving you the focus. That's it. Thank you, Keith. Right. Okay, who's the next contender for the most wacky grass?
I don't know if it's... Here you go, Rose.
You there?
Go, Rose.
Okay. I don't know if it's particularly wacky, but I'm pretty sure I found a Micella. I think it looks quite different to the bromus, because its seed, like the seeds themselves, seem to be a bit more singular. They're not grouped or packaged as much, if you will.
Yes.
See that? Oh, I'm going to turn off my background. My background is going to get in the way of this. So we can quite see that. And they're also quite purple, or red, or however you like to describe that colour. as opposed to green for the rest of the plant and other seasons.
Okay, thank you, Rose. That's good. The important thing there was that the needle grasses and the spear grasses all used to be in the genus Stipa. And within a genus, you'll find that either the whole genus has only one seed inside each spikelet, as it's called, I'll explain that later, or they never have just one, depending on which genus you're talking about. So all of those three search species that I gave you have more than one seed inside each spikelet. But you're right, your needlegrass has just one. The other character just meaning a feature that we use to characterize those species, the other character you mentioned was the purplishness. So I would put that in a similar category, well, certainly to the people this morning. People who are coming to this course, I'm finding choosing species that are different on their overall appearance, not so much getting down to details, although certainly, Rose, you got down to the level of seeing how many seeds there were within each spikelet, so that's good. I'll give one more person the chance. Now, who was it? Was it Elliot? Somebody I think was about to show me something.
Yeah, I've just got a couple here. My first one, I'm pretty sure it's Phalaris. So I guess the thing that stood out for me was the larger, is it Ligwell? Yeah, so compared to the three that you, I guess you got us to collect, this one here, that was the one that stood out, that it had that large Ligwell compared to the other three. And yeah, probably another one was just is it Lagaris? Yeah, so I just think, yeah, just with the structure of the, I guess the seed head and all that, it's a bit different to what we do see compared to the other three.
And Madeline's agreeing with you. I think you've got a hare's tail grass too, have you, Madeline?
Yeah, that's one I found too.
Okay, so both of them would have come from saline sandy soils, probably around the beach, was it?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and I'd say that one is radically different in a number of respects. Again, there's the general impression thing. It's really soft and lovely to stroke against your cheek, unless you've got a beard, in which case you've got to do a bit higher on your cheek. They're beautifully soft. The structure of the spikelets is actually quite complicated in that as well. And it is incredibly difficult to see which are the individual spikelets in such a dense seed head. And I'm going to address that during this session, most of the way through the session, halfway through actually. Good, well, look, that's enough. I won't award a prize for the species that is most different. And Elliot, that ligule, that was certainly an example of you looking at fine details rather than just general impression and shape sort of things. I'm going to progress everybody along from focusing more on the general impression and shape sort of differences that you notice to the more useful things that you wouldn't think about until you're actually shown what to do with a grass plant. So that's a good start. I'll explain to you what sort of things are best to look at to distinguish grasses. And I also gave you that exercise of writing a checklist of all of the characters that might be useful for identifying a grass, such as the length of a ligule or the presence of runners, all those sorts of things. And again, it wasn't that I was expecting you to come up with a definitive list. It is just to give you that exercise of thinking about what could you use? Let's have a look at this plant and that plant and see how they differ. Maybe we could use the number of seeds inside each spikelet. And in fact, that is a really useful one. So that was the purpose, just to get you handling things, looking closely and thinking about just how do grasses differ. Most people find, in fact, I think everybody I've ever asked has said they found that exercise useful. And I think the main use of it is, well, firstly, that to one degree or another, we're all kinesthetic learners. That is, we learn by doing and handling. And the other really important thing is it does encourage you to look closely and handle things, which you've really got to do in order to get the most out of a course like this. Okay, are there any questions or comments before we move on? And I'm just thinking, is there something that I should have been telling you right at the outset? I can't think of anything. Any questions and comments? No, you don't look bored out of your little brains, so I'll assume that everything's okay. Right, now I have a set of PowerPoint slides, which I'm now going to show, and I need to just share my screen. There might be a shortcut on the keyboard for doing this, but I haven't worked it out. Now, so I'll show you these slides, and there's a place that you can download the slides from the internet. I'll put this slide up at the very end as well, so you don't need to rush to write it down. And as you know, this session is being recorded, so you'll be able to get it, get the recording and look for the slides that way as well. Now, that screen there, that was not supposed to happen. No, it didn't happen this morning. Let me try again.
Quick question about tomorrow, Graham. Is it a good idea for us to have the wallaby grass key for tomorrow?
Yeah, bring that along. That and the key grass species of Victoria, bring that along. And I'll talk more about what to bring along, like food and drink and so on, before we finish up. And Rose is on the ball. She has put in the chat thing the link. And of course, I should have done that. What I find is, though, that if you put the link in before everybody comes along, it disappears and people who come in afterwards don't get to see it. So that's excellent. Thank you. Now, I'm going to get this working again, and we'll see how that goes. Share screen, not that one. Click there. Okay. Right, that's back where we were. And now let's talk about the structure of a grass plant, starting from ground level. And I've already discussed in the introductory video that some grasses have got runners. So you could have chosen for one of your wacky grasses, one that's got runners. The runners might be above ground or below ground. But the root system of the grass plant is actually really important. Rhizomes or underground runners are not actually roots. They are stems that are underground. They're stems because they've got leaves on them. They might produce roots from them, just as the base of any plant is likely to do. But a rhizome or underground runner is actually a stem. You'll find the reduced leaves on them. The other thing that's really important about the root system of the grass plant is how robust it is. Annual grass plants, in fact, annuals of any sort of plant, have only a weak root system. That's because a species which grows as an annual generally won't last for the whole of the year. They reproduce before they get to the hard time of the year. And the harshest time of year for most grasses and most other plants in southeastern Australia is, of course, the period through January, February, March. Not much rain, really hot conditions. That doesn't hurt an annual because most of them are dead at that time of the year. There are a few grasses and other sorts of plants that are annuals which haven't even germinated for the year yet. I'm thinking of, in particular, Mexican lovegrass, Eragrostis mexicana, which will be germinating over the next few weeks. And you'll see it in flower in February and particularly March, and then it will die in autumn. It won't make it through winter. So depending on the species, there might be variation in which season is harsh for them. But annual species don't have to get through a period that is adverse to their active growth phase. So they're just really fast growing in order to jam their whole life cycle into the months that are available to them, or in some cases just weeks. And their ecology is such that they're not very good at competing with other grasses, but I'm getting ahead of myself there. Let's talk about the root systems. An annual grass will have rather weak roots, so that if you give your grass specimen of interest a little jiggle, and I'll demonstrate this tomorrow and get you to try it, give it a jiggle, a bit vertically, a bit sideways. If it gradually comes up with the root system pretty much intact and not much root system, just fine roots, not going far into the soil, that will be an annual species. A perennial species that lives for more than a couple of years is going to be very much harder to pull out of the ground, except in the very loosest of sands. There are a couple of short-lived perennials, including the prairie grass that you might have collected, which is not as easy to pull out as an annual, but not quite as hard as your average perennial species. And then there's sweet vernal grass, which can get through into a second year in many years, not during a drought, but in many years. Sweet vernal grass, a rather important introduced one that I'll show you. It will get into its second year, but it still has a very fine, weak root system, much more extensive than most annual grasses, but it's still got a shallow root system, and it behaves in all important respects the same as an annual species, except that it doesn't necessarily die within a year of it germinating. Now, it turns out that in Victoria, because of our climate and our soils and our native animals, we have very few indigenous annual species or native annual species, except if you go into the Mallee, where the climate and the sands allow annuals to thrive. The only exception that you will commonly come across that is an annual species that's native is common blown grass, or Lachnocrostus filiformis. What this means is that if you establish that a particular grass that you encounter is easy to pull out, really easy, and only has a shallow, wispy root system, it'll be introduced unless it's common blown grass. There are a couple of other blown grasses that look very similar. So as long as you know what a common blown grass looks like, if your grass of interest, an annual species, doesn't look like a common blown grass, it is pretty much certainly an introduced species. And that can be useful if you don't want annual species. And there's also management information, but before I go on to that, I better show you what common blown grass looks like, since I've said how it's the one that you need to exclude from all of the annual grasses that you might encounter. Here is a photo of one, and you'll see a maturing inflorescence in the middle showing its widely spreading delicate branches with spikelets out the ends. And I'll show you a real one in a minute. You'll also see some developing inflorescences here. They look rather different, don't they? There's one that's still emerging from a leaf sheath, because all grass seed heads or inflorescences initially emerge from leaf sheaths, like this one is doing, and this one is halfway through doing. And ultimately, the seed head fully emerges from its leaf sheath, and this is what a blown grass looks like. They're called blown grasses collectively, the Lachnocrostus species, because at maturity, these seed heads snap off and blow around on the wind, hence blown grass. All of the blown grasses are native species. Now, I should have checked by now. I presumed that the lac bit of the scientific name refers to lakes. If it isn't, it should be. Agrostis certainly just means grass, But these are species of drying mud, and you will find them where a lake is drying out around the muddy margins. You'll find them where a puddle is drying out, which might be on a bush track or in your back garden. It only needs a small puddle, and you're likely to find this thing volunteering itself there. The seeds obviously are well able to get around the landscape because they're blown around. In fact, come Christmas time, and typically the week before Christmas, you'll see loads of these seed heads piling up against fences in rural Victoria, and for that matter, through the suburbs as well. You can confuse that with the seed heads of the panicum species and its close relative Wolwellia prolutum, and also serrated tussock has seed heads that snap off and blow around the wind. Only the blown grasses, though, have annual rootstocks and survive for less than a year. Now, I'm going to unshare my screen there so that I can show you what a fresh specimen looks like. I'm just changing cameras so that I can show you against the white background. Whoops, that's the wrong specimen. Here it is. Okay. Now, white background isn't ideal, but I found that if I use a black background or something dark, the camera adjusts the exposure to the dark background, and then the subject is overexposed and you can't see it well either. So here is my seed head. You get a sense of the size of the thing. It can be a bit smaller than this, like half this size or even a third. I want you to notice that those branches are extremely delicate and floppy. And that helps distinguish this from the one sort of grass that you might confuse a blown grass with, and that is the silvery hair grasses, which I'll be able to show you in the field. Silvery hair grasses, or Aira species, A-I-R-A, have the same sort of branching. They're much smaller, but you could confuse them as a small blown grass. But the branches are not at all delicate. They don't flop around like that at all. The spikets are also a totally different size, so I can show you that outdoors. So if I go back now to my slideshow, it's worthwhile knowing what blown grass looks like, because it's pretty much the annual native grass that you're likely to encounter. Anybody got any questions on that? No? Then let me go on and tell you the really important corollary to all of that. If you know a grass species is an annual and you've concluded that it's not blown grass, it's introduced, or you might have multiple species, you usually do actually. If you've got annuals, you've usually got multiples of it for reasons that I'll explain out in the field. You can also conclude how you might go about getting rid of it if you want to give that a try. Farmers might want to do it because annuals are, in most cases, not productive, and they take away resources from the productive aspects of the pasture. And in nature conservation, you might not want them just because they're not native or because they are competing with the native species that you're trying to conserve. It turns out that annual species are just so keen to germinate, grow up, have a short and happy productive life, and produce copious seeds, that when the conditions are right for them to germinate, they all germinate. That would typically happen at the autumn break for most species, or with that Mexican lovegrass as a counterexample. It's waiting for summer showers over the coming weeks. Once those conditions arrive, all of the seeds germinate, with the emphasis on the all, because they don't leave seeds in the soil for a subsequent year, or hardly any. What that means is, if you are able to kill all of the members of that species after they've germinated, and before the first of them has dropped any seeds, then you've got rid of it. And it doesn't mean you can't have other ones blow in, like the serrated tussock or some other species blowing in from the surrounding areas, but you can completely eradicate these grasses, including sweet vernal grass, which is not strictly annual, but as I said, behaves like one. And the ways that you can do that include use of fire, use of crash grazing, use of selective herbicide, and I'll explain all of those things later on in the course. Or if you're keen, you can read ahead in the notes where I describe these techniques under the management stuff towards the end of the notes, headed wild grasses of southeastern Australia. So, knowing about the root systems of the plant can be really beneficial in helping to identify, sometimes work out whether it's native or not, and knowing what to do about it if you want to get rid of it. Now, I've emphasised that annual species in Victoria are overwhelmingly introduced. The converse does not apply. Introduced species are not all annuals. There are plenty of perennial species that are introduced. It's just that because of our fauna, which relates to our soil types, and because of our climate, we just don't have too many native annuals. They've come from overseas. Okay, any questions or comments relating to root systems or those annual grass species before we move on to the leaves of the grass plant?
I have a question, Graham, about are there any perennial blown grass species?
Yes, there are. They tend not to be very long-lived species. Austin Brown is still working on them. Most of the Lachnogrostis species that we now know have been, certainly quite a few have been described by my colleague Austin Brown. We're both honorary associates of the Royal Botanic Gardens. Neither of us get paid to do our work on grasses, other than you people are paying for me to do my research, which would otherwise be entirely at my own expense. Austin Brown has done a wonderful job of taking what were just a very small number of species, like 3 or 4 in Victoria, and describing all of the other ones that had gone unknown or that were thought to be extinct and that sort of thing. Amongst them are some perennial species. And I'm trying to think which ones are perennial. I have a feeling that Adamson's bent, or Lachnogrostis adamsoni, is a perennial species. Now, some of you consultants like Georgina or Rose might know, because you'd be doing some basalt plains survey work and need to know about that threatened species. Do you know whether it's perennial?
I'm afraid I don't, Graham. Most of the work that I do is in northeast Victoria.
Okay.
And I haven't.
Madeline, do you know?
No, I'm not sure either, Graham.
Okay. Well, there's an exercise for this student. If you really want to know, go and look it up. Vic Flora, if you just Google Vic Flora, if you're not familiar with the Vic Flora website, find the page for that species and it will tell you. By the way, if you're interested in that species, you'll find lots of records from the Melbourne area and even further east. They're all wrong. Austin Brown knows that species better than anybody, and he says they don't come that close to Melbourne. Now, Madeline, in your area, you certainly have it. And I think once you get to around sort of Geelong area or around about that longitude, it doesn't go further east than that. I could be a bit wrong with my boundary there, but it's somewhere around there. So if you're further east and you think you've got Adamson's bent, you'll probably, like countless other people, made a mistake somewhere. Okay, any other questions before moving on? Because we're going to run out of time.
Thanks, Graham.
Good. Then let's go on to the leaf structure. In the YouTube video, I've already introduced you to that general structure of a grass plant in having the, the structure of the grass plant's leaf in having a blade and a sheath with a clear junction, when you look for it, called the collar. In that collar, we have a thing called the ligule, which is like an overshoot of the sheath. And so you've been looking at that sort of stuff and doing the exercise that I gave you. I've labelled on this photograph of a bearded oak plant the node. So what we're looking at above, well, let's talk about below the node. We are looking at the stem, which can also be called a culm, or a pedant who likes to impress with their understanding of Latin will say, oh no, it's a culm, but nobody will know what you're talking about. So you can call it a culm, but a grass plant only has a culm rather than a stem if it's vertical or near enough to it. Horizontal stems are just stems, you wouldn't call them culms. So why not just call them all stems, unless you want to impress people at parties. So below the node is the stem or culm. We've got the node. The node is the point at which the leaf sheath is attached. So what we're seeing directly above the node is the surface of the leaf, and the stem is actually wrapped up inside that sheath. So we've got the sheath here rising to the collar with an overshoot called the ligule, which depending on the species might look quite different to that, and the blade. There is growth tissue here. The reason for the different colour, and if you look at your various specimens that you've collected, you'll probably find some of them have different coloured tissue there. That's where new cells are being produced in order for the leaf blade to grow. A leaf blade doesn't grow uniformly along its length. It can only grow from its base. As you will find if you've just done the lawn and you watch the grass leaves grow, you can actually see this happening. They will grow from the base. The sheath, on the other hand, grows from its base, because in this node, down the base there, there's more of this so-called meristem tissue or growth tissue that puts on more cells for the leaf sheath to grow from. So a grass, unlike many other sorts of plants, has 2 points at which its leaves grow from. One at the node, at the base of the sheath, and the other at the collar. Now, the sorts of things that we can use for identifying a grass include the obvious ones of how long and broad the leaf blade is, but that's not as useful as you might hope, because the size of a grass leaf in both its length and its width can vary according to the growing conditions, and of course, they can expand as the grass leaf develops. So if you see a really long or particularly broad leaf, then yes, that's telling you it's one of the small number of grass species that can produce such wide or long leaves. But if you've got a grass that's got a small to middling sort of length and width of leaf, you won't necessarily know whether that's just because the grass is not happy with where it's growing, or whether it's been trampled earlier in its life or something like that. So there is a limit to the usefulness of the size of the leaves, but particularly for long ones, it's useful. The cross-sectional leaf shape is more important, both in the blade and in the sheath. Let's talk about the blade first. On the oak plant, as illustrated here, the leaf blade is flat. If you have a look at a prairie grass, if that was one of the species you collected, you'll see that it's more V-shaped, but ultimately gets more or less flat. Or if you collected it earlier than this morning, you might find that it's curling in at the edges as it dries out. And then there are species like rough speargrass that I'll show you tomorrow, whose leaves grow like this. You could call that inrolled or involute. What you'll find is that quite a few grasses that have leaves that are either V-shaped in cross-section or flat in cross-section when they're fresh, will do these sorts of things as they dry out. So the important thing is to note what the leaves are like when they are fresh. That could be a particularly important point for people like Georgina and Rose, who are consultants and will collect specimens through the course of a day's surveying and take them away for identification later. you need to know what those leaf blades are like when they were fresh, particularly for something like rough speargrass, Osteostypus scabra, versus Osteostypum nodosa, because it's only the foliage that I can tell the two species apart. And you can't do it once they've dried out. Well, you can a bit, but it's certainly a lot better to know what they're like when they're fresh. I'll show you that tomorrow because both species are out where we're going. Okay, so cross-sectional shape of blade is useful. So is the cross-sectional shape of the sheath. Now, did anybody collect a grass whose sheath actually has a fold along the spine, along its length, so that if you were to roll the sheath around in your fingers, it doesn't feel at all round? Anybody got one like that? Like a veld grass, for example, or a cocksfoot. Cocksfoot, very common. I might stop sharing my screen so that I can give you an example of what this would be like. I have here, I've got a couple of, got far more grass specimens than I need. Where's my annual veld grass? It's here. There we go. Annual veld grass looks like this. And one thing to note is that the stems branch all over the place. So I start off with one stem at the base, and then I find 2, 3, and more as I go further up. And when I have a look at one leaf sheath, right, there's my blade. The blade is flat. It's got crinkly edges, usually on just one edge, for reasons that may or may not become apparent to you, but I can explain if you want. But if we can get good focus there, can you see that it's got a real fold along the spine there? I think I can with the lighting. And so this one, if you were to put this in my fingers while I'm blindfolded, I could tell you that this must be one of very few species in Victoria. In fact, I'd probably say this feels like Ehata longiflora, the annual veld grass. No other grass is quite as folded along the spine as that. Cocksfoot is folded, but not to that extent. Paspalum a little bit less. So depending on the species, it may be more or less folded along the spine. Most grasses are just round in cross-section. Those things are really useful. I note that a number of you said that you wanted to be able to identify grasses when they're not in flower. If you want to be able to do that, you're going to need to do these sorts of things. The feel of the cross-sectional shape of the sheath and the cross-sectional shape of the blade. Okay, any questions as I go back to sharing my screen?
That's good, Graham. I've got a Paspalum dilatatum, so that's nice to know.
Okay, good, yes. Can you feel that? It's Sam, is it? I'm busily doing something else. Yeah.
Yeah, I can.
Describe it for us, Sam.
It just feels flat, and then I guess each side of the stem, yeah, is a lot tougher and more, has an edge to it, I guess, a little bit.
When you say the stem, that would be the sheath rather than the stem proper, wouldn't it?
Yeah, the sheath. Yep.
Yeah, the stem might also be oval in cross section rather
Yes.
than completely circular.
Yep.
Okay. Then there are a whole lot of touchy-feely things that are really important for identifying a grass, such as how floppy they are, how hairy, how rough, and that sort of thing. Then there's appearance in the colour of the leaves, whether they're glossy. However, colour can vary a lot according to soil type, nutrient status in the soil, and how much sun they have seen. So colour can fool people in some cases, but people who become experts, I know some people, including probably some here, have done spraying of Chilean needlegrass, and you tend to get your eye in for that particular colour of green, except that there are native spear grasses with the same colour of green that occasionally get sprayed by mistake because they do have that same colour. In fact, they look very similar in many respects. So there are lots of touchy-feely things. Again, I'd encourage you when we're out in the field, And when you're on your own, thinking about grasses for that matter, do handle these things because each grass has got its own feel. For example, I'm going to show you sweet vernal grass, which is introduced and an important environmental weed and a problem in pasture. And I'll show you reed bent grass, a native, Teuxia quadriceta. And during the start of this course, when I first show people these things, they typically can't tell the difference. But when you feel them, they feel quite different. So those touchy-feely things are really very practical for identification. The last thing I've got here is the splitting of the sheaths. You'll notice that in my photo here of the bearded oat, we can see the split in the sheath. If you have a look at your grass specimens that you've collected, except for prairie grass, if you've got that, or any other bromus species that you might have collected, the sheath is like a cylinder encircling the stem once the stem is produced, except that it's split. Now, you might not notice the split, particularly on something like the oat plant, because the two edges, if you're thinking of the split as having an edge on each side of the split, they tend to overlap a bit and often will be so tightly pressed against each other that you might not see it at first. But if you pull the leaf blade away from the stem, that will usually allow you to see that, yes, it is split. And in most grasses, it will be split right down to the base. In the Glyceria species, it will only go down about 80 or 90% of the way. That would be a useful identifying feature. And in the brome species, and also in Festuca rubra or red fescue that you might have in your lawn, the split only goes a short distance down. And I think of the split or partial split being like a V-neck or a plunging neckline, depending on which particular species of bromus it is. And rather than being left with some uncertainty about whether the split, whether you just can't see the split, because sometimes it's hard, with the bromus species, you'll see this V-neck or plunging neckline, and at the base of that, you'll see that convincingly, it's definitely not split. It's much more obvious. So that's a really useful character for that genus, of which there are, I'm trying to remember, I'm just writing a chapter on bromus, but that's for New South Wales. In Victoria, we've got something of the order of, is it about 10 species? Oh no, it'd be more than that. Let's say 15, dozen 15. One of them's native, pretty much only in the Mallee. There are records from around the Mornington Peninsula, but they're a bit fishy. There's just that special thing for that one genus. Now, the collar contains really useful identification features. If you want to learn how to identify a grass when it's not flowering, then you're stuck with leaves pretty much. And the part of the leaf which carries the most information would be the collar. And I'm not diminishing looking at the cross-sectional shape of the leaf sheath and the leaf blade. They are very useful, but the collar is also extremely useful. And the mere fact that a grass has got a collar is an important thing, because you might get confused between a grass and some of the rushes and some members of the sedge family and centralepices, which are now put in the Restionaceae family. In fact, a number of species from the Restionaceae family, the Restiads as they're commonly called, can look like grasses. But whilst some members of the sedge family and some rushes in the genus Truncus do have collars, most of them don't. No collar, no ligule, because they only have that meristem tissue or growth tissue at the base of the leaf, not the two-part structure that a grass does. And that would allow you to dismiss the Mandrifiliformis subspecies filiformis from being a grass, even though it looks for all the world like a grass, until you see it flower and you see it's got yellow flowers, and it's clearly attracting a pollinator. So the mere fact that your specimen has got a collar and maybe a ligule, although you won't always see it, that's important just to make sure you do have a grass rather than maybe having a member of the sedge family or the rush family, mat rush or something like that. There is one genus in Victoria of grass that doesn't have a ligule, but it does have a collar, a really obvious collar. That genus is the genus Echinocloa, barnyard grasses, and they're germinating about now in drains, roadside gutters, that sort of thing, and somebody's got their microphone on. Nearly all grasses have got a collar with a ligule. All of them actually have a collar. Sometimes they can be hard to see. The ligules are important because they vary substantially between the species, but they don't vary much according to growth conditions or stage of growth within a species. In other words, you can expect the appearance of a ligule to be distinctive of a species, not just an artifice of how far developed your particular leaf is or what growing conditions might be prevailing. So they're really useful. And the sort of things that we would be using to distinguish species based on their ligule are whether, or how long it is, its shape, hairiness, thickness, if it's transparent or not. All those sorts of things are important. There are the only other parts of a grass plant that you can rely on to have the typical sort of dimensions and overall appearance for a particular species and not be influenced strongly by stage of development or the growing conditions are the spikelets and their contents. Everything else about a grass plant might be quite variable within the species. So we focus our identification to a large degree on the collar and on the spikelets. But there are plenty of other things to use as well, but they're really important ones. A word of caution though, don't despair if you cannot see a ligule, at least at first, without the aid of a hand lens. Ligules can often be really tiny. For example, wallaby grasses' ligules are lines of hairs, 0.5 millimetre long typically, sometimes considerably less. You'll have trouble seeing them even with a hand lens. So that is why I say, don't rely on seeing a ligule. The absence of being able to see a ligule doesn't mean you don't have a grass, or that if it is a grass, it's a barnyard grass, which doesn't have a ligule. Rather, it could just be that it's too small for you to see. Even in those cases, you might not see the ligule, but you will see that there is a collar when you go looking for it. Our native poas are the most difficult ones in that regard. We will see native poas as we go around the place. They have a tiny ligule in nearly all cases, like 0.5 millimetre or less long in many cases. And the collar is harder to see at first sight, but when you go looking for it, you'll see, oh yeah, suddenly there's a contraction by a factor of about half. The sheath is about twice the diameter of the blade. And so you will see that at a distinct point, which is the collar. Here are some things that stand out in certain species about their collar areas. Wallaby grasses as a group tend to have distinctive hairs on each side of the top of the sheath. So if we call this whole area the collar, including the growth tissue or meristem, which is pale here, or almost transparent, and includes the ligule, and these bits on the sides of the collar, well, on the side of the collar of my shirt, I've got shoulders. So I'm going to call these bits over here shoulders. And on the wallaby grass, you expect there to be some hairs which particularly if you were to pull the leaf away from the stem, as I've done gently here, you will see, I'll show you one species tomorrow, the brownback wallaby grass, where it produces very few of these hairs, and they can rub off over time. So on brownback wallaby grass, if you don't immediately see the hairs, it might be that there were never very many and they've rubbed off. And it probably won't have the hairs extending right around the back of the collar, where you see these shorter hairs on this hill wallaby grass, or Ritidosperma erianthum. Often the shoulder hairs are not as big as this, but they are something to use to recognise a wallaby grass out in the field if you've got no flowering material. That's certainly something I use in my field work. Another thing that I find really useful about the collar area is whether at the top of the sheath, the grass leaf fans out at right angles. And I'm calling these flanges. I haven't seen them called that elsewhere, but I have a bit of an engineering background. Although I'm an astrophysicist and mathematician by training, but if you had a pipe and you wanted to put a flat bit on it to attach something, the flat bit would be called a flange. And so this is like a flange that you might see at the end of a pipe where it's at right angles to the axis of the pipe. Now, you'll notice on the common wheatgrass, not only does it abruptly fan out at right angles at the top of the sheath, but there are these little appendages or protrusions that are called auricles in the books. Here's something that might be more memorable. I think of these as like little arms reaching around to hug the stem. If that helps you remember that this is a feature of common wheatgrass, then that's useful. Common wheatgrass also has these shaggy hairs. It's a bit mealy on the sheath. And what else shall I say about that? There are certainly very useful identifying features in the seed head and also the growth habit, which I'll show you tomorrow. We'll see this in the field. Weeping grass has a similar flange-shaped thing, and again, you can see that paler meristem tissue on the flange. And it's got some hairs there as a rule, not as prominent as the wallaby grass and not nearly as soft as the hairs on the wallaby grass leaf. So this is something that I use for a weeping grass when it's not in flower, along with the colour and a special thing about the leaf tip that I'll have to show you in the field. So if you're really wanting to become good at identifying grasses in the field, when they're not flowering, check the leaf sheath cross-section, check the leaf blade cross-section, note the colour and so on. But after all that stuff, focus on the collar. That's where you're likely to get most useful information about what the species is. Before I go on to stems, are there any questions?
Yes, I have a question. What's the difference between a hairy shoulder and a ligule?
The ligule is on the inside of the leaf blades. So perhaps I should go back to sharing it. Perhaps I'll get a leaf and I will do it this way. Thanks for the question, Tim. I've got here a specimen of common reed, which would be a good candidate for a wacky grass that differs in many ways from the other ones. The leaf sheaths at the base you'll see don't have blades down the bottom here. It's a very upright grass. It branches once it gets to a certain height, so it's got all sorts of things. I'll go to one of the higher leaves. You'll see that they get bigger the further up you go, which is the reverse of most tufted grass plants. The reed type grasses differ in that respect. Now, here's my leaf blade, and a leaf blade has got what you might call an upper surface and a lower surface, or the boffins will call it the adaxial surface and the abaxial surface. I'll just use upper and lower, okay? So here's my upper surface. If I follow the upper surface of the leaf blade down to there, there is my ligule once it gets into focus. I'll try pulling it away from the rest of the thing. Okay, now you can see it's got some hairs there. The hairs are longer at the edge and very short along the middle. So that's the ligule. Now, if I have a look at the upper surface of the blade and work down to its base, I'm not seeing anything quite like that. In fact, it might have some microscopic hairs there because it's got a sort of shimmering appearance. Now, the shoulders are on the outside here, whereas the ligule is on the inside. Does that make sense, Tim?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. The presence of those hairs on the outside is a good identification feature, but you don't find it on many species. It does occur on bamboos, or at least some of them, most of them, and on wallaby grasses and not many others. So that's why it's a really useful thing to notice. Any other questions?
Sorry, Graham. I guess just with that, sort of without the seed head, you're talking about the identification. Is there ways with Vulpia and the wallaby grasses that you can, I guess, that early detection in terms of identifying?
Flower, you mean, Elliot?
Yeah, I know. Just there's some confusion sometimes as to what is Vulpia and what is wallaby grass. I didn't know if there was any ways of detecting it before actually.
Dead easy. Elliot, I'll show you in the field tomorrow. We'll see some Vulpia species, the silver grasses. We'll probably see 2 species tomorrow. What if I tell you that Vulpias are all annuals and that wallaby grasses are all perennials?
Yeah, okay. So I'm guessing it's just the ease of pulling it out, or the shallow root system. Okay.
Yep.
No worries.
That collar area does look quite different. A Vulpia species has got a much larger ligule and not a line of hairs. And for everybody, I should explain that Elliot has a very good reason, or may have this reason, may have other reasons too. There's a very good reason for somebody like Elliot to ask about the similarity, because I have on at least 2, I think 3 occasions seen these introduced silver grasses or Vulpia species, well, specifically one of them called squirrel tail fescue, Vulpia bromoides, being sold in indigenous nurseries as wallaby grasses, because people make that mistake. They can be confused by people who don't know this stuff and don't know what to look for. But root systems is one thing to look for. Any other questions? Then let's move on. Now I've got to find my little specimen for the talk about stems. Where is my little specimen? I put it down after this morning's group and I'm struggling to find it. It's hiding. I might have to improvise with another species. It's here somewhere. I told you I have far more grass species than I need. And what that means is it's hard to find the one I want. I'm going to use this. I've got a bit of bamboo. I'll change cameras again. Here's bamboo. I chose this as a contender for the wackiest grass species. Bamboo differs from all those more plain everyday run-of-the-mill, one-size-fits-all generic grass in that it produces wood. Other grasses don't. It's got all this interesting branching and whorls of branches. It's got 2 different sorts of sheaths. It's got the pale ones that have no blade on them. Then it's got the green ones that are more usual for a grass. I'm going to just pluck off one of these shoots, and we'll pretend that this is from a tufted grass plant and that this was at the base of the plant. When a tufted grass puts on a new shoot, which might be on germination or it might be as a side shoot later on in the plant's life, it starts off that new shoot with one leaf, and that leaf will have the usual sheath and a blade, and it'll have the collar there, of course, and these bits, the second and third leaf there, won't be there. So that's what it would look like as the first leaf is produced. Once that first leaf is produced, it starts to put on a second leaf, and that second leaf emerges up through the sheath of the first one. So the tip of this leaf would have emerged from the sheath of the first leaf and finally come out to where we see it now. And now we see the third leaf emerging from inside the cylinder that is being formed by the first two leaf sheaths. And had I not cut this morning, this would have continued to put on new sheaths, each one protected in its tender developing stage by the surrounding leaf sheaths, because every leaf grows, at least its sheath grows from that meristem tissue right down at the base of the shoot. So each leaf is putting on new cells and putting its sheath up through there, and partway up there'll be a collar with more meristem tissue, and the blade will be emerging from that. And so progressively a shoot of a grass plant puts on all these different leaves. And in a tufted grass plant, a number of leaves will be produced, typically of the order of 6 or 10. It depends on the species, but it'll put on a number of leaves, and each leaf sheath has the important role of helping to protect the tender young growth of the subsequent leaves. I think that makes sense, doesn't it? Looking for nodding heads, other than people nodding off to sleep. Then for a tufted grass plant, when it gets to flowering time, which is mostly this time of year, hence why we run the course at this time of the year, something amazing happens. And remembering that each leaf is attached to a node, the nodes at this sort of stage are all down at the base there, one inside another, and each leaf has a node which is right on top of the next one down. And at flowering time, a stem has to emerge. What happens at that point is that the nodes separate from each other telescopically, and what we call internodes elongate. It's a little bit like the old-fashioned car radio antennas. You know how, well, those of us old enough, one used to press a button inside the car and telescopically the antenna would rise up. So that these leaves that start off their lives as leaves at the base of the plant will be carried up as the internodes, the space between the nodes, elongates. And finally, we find the seed head or inflorescence is the last thing to emerge from that. I'll see if I've got a good specimen to illustrate that. I think I collected a note for that purpose. This one will do. Okay, I've got some shoots at the base. Here is what you might call a vegetative shoot, that one that hasn't yet started to flower. And no nodes are visible yet. That's because they're all down at the base of the plant. So if this were to get nibbled off or mown, then it would still have the capacity to keep growing after that. That's how grasses have managed to co-evolve with grazing animals. They're able to sprout from at or below ground level. So this one is still putting on leaves at that stage. And then I have a more advanced one, this one here. And you can see that we've got a leaf sheath and its blade, and then there's a node, more leaf sheath, and its blade is here. And you can see the seed head or inflorescence is still emerging from in the leaf, this uppermost leaf sheath. In fact, this top leaf has the very important role of protecting and supporting the seed head or inflorescence at its most tender stage. In fact, if you take any of the stems that you might have collected and peel the sheath down from your top leaf, the flag leaf as it's called, you will find that the stem within that sheath is just really weak. It'll just flop over. It won't stand up by itself, no way. So this is an example of how the stem elongates to ultimately let the spikelets, which are these bits, emerge and shed their pollen and do their thing and ultimately develop into seeds. Okay, I'll talk more about that later. I am now going to swap over to sharing my screen, and you can ask questions while I'm doing that if you like.
Graham, would the distance between the blade and the node be an identifying feature, or like how far between, like how much space there is between the node and where the collar is?
Okay, yeah, so that's equal to the length of the sheath, right?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, I was more just thinking like some of them, I guess the collar is really close to the node, whereas others there's more distance.
Yeah, I think of that as being the length of the sheath. The length of the leaf sheath, you might hope, was a useful identifying feature, but it depends so much on the growing conditions. There will be variations from one species to another, but the trouble is there will also be a lot of variation within the species according to growing conditions, and so it's not very helpful as it turns out. Any other questions? No, okay, then we better press on. Oh yeah, we've definitely got to press on. Right, so the stems form within the leaf sheaths, and for a tufted grass plant, which is most of the grass species that we have in Victoria, not in the Northern Hemisphere prairies and Southern Hemisphere, or in the steppes or the pampa of South America and so on. But because of our grazing animals not being ungulates and because of our soil type and our climate, most of our grasses are tufted grasses. Tufted grasses behave the way I've just described, but there are some grasses that after they've produced each leaf, instead of the next one emerging from within the sheath, at the same time, a length of the internode is added. And so the new sheath very quickly ends up separated from the protection of its previous leaf sheath. And so you end up with a stem that is not leafy at its base, and the leaves are evenly distributed along stems. And those stems generally last for more than a year. And this is what occurs in creeping grasses like couch or kikuyu. It happens in scrambling grasses like forest wiregrass, and it happens in bamboo and other reed-like grasses such as common reed or Phragmites australis. And I've just shown you a specimen of common reed. So they have a different growth mechanism, and that's really important for identification, and you can recognize it by the way the stems appear, whether there are lots of leaves at the base of the plant and a stem with a few leaves up it, as opposed to little, if any, leaf at the base. And remember I showed you that common reed had only small leaves with sheaths and no blades at the base of it, and gradually bigger further up. That's telling you it's not a tufted grass plant, and it's growing in a completely different way. And that really narrows down the identity of the plant. Okay, so grass stems might be upright or they might be creeping and so on. They're obviously really useful identifying features. Whether they branch or not is really important to notice, but rarely used in books or other identification resources like Vic Flora. So things like kangaroo grass, which has branched stems, at least after the first year of the stem, usually after the first 6 months. And the veld grasses, they all have branched stems. That's important. Plant height can be useful in that if you have a tall grass, you know it's one of those grasses that can grow tall. It couldn't be well, we talked about vulpes before, they're all small species. But if you've got a small one, you might not be sure whether it's small because that's the way of the species, as opposed to just being a manifestation of the soil becoming compacted and the plant not really growing to its full stature. Now, stems of nearly all grass species have got nodes up them so that once it's reached flowering time, you'll see leaves attached at intervals up the stem, maybe only one or two, but you will see that there are stems up the leaves, and the base of each sheath, there is a node. Nodes can sometimes be hard to find because they're still hidden within the sheath of the next leaf down, but with a bit of probing or using your fingers to feel for them, you will find that in nearly all grass species, there are nodes up the stem by the time the grass is flowering. And most commonly, you'll see the nodes as those lumps, often with a different colour from the rest of the stem. That's not true of a couple of wallaby grass species in Victoria and 1/3 one in Tasmania. And it's not true of rye beetle grass or changed its name, Tripogonella loliiformis. All other grasses that I can think of have got nodes up the stem. So have many rushes and members of the sedge family, but many others in those families and the mat rushes don't have nodes up the stems. So if you saw a grassy plant and you don't see any nodes up the stems, then you've got to be a bit suspicious that it might not be a grass at all. And the final thing about stems of grass plants is if you find that the stems are triangular in cross-section, then it's in the sedge family. In fact, it'll be in one of several genera within the sedge family. It might be a carex, whichever way you want to pronounce it. It might be a cyperus, cyperus, however you want to pronounce that. It might be a bulbochenus. There are a range of possibilities within the sedge family and a whole lot of other genera in the sedge family that don't have triangular cross sections. All carexes have got triangular cross sections, all cyperus too. Oh, say all. No, there might be a couple that are only ever so slightly triangular. Some of you might be thinking, what about Carex tereticollis? Because terete means cylindrical and collis means stem, as in cauliflower means stem flower. Tereticollis literally means the carex that has the round stem. You have a look just underneath the seed head. If a grassy plant has a triangular cross section at any point on the stem, it will be best developed just underneath the seed head. So that is where to look, even on Carex tereticollis. Okay, any questions on the stem of a grass plant before we go into the seed head? Good, time to move on to the seed head. It's the most useful part of a plant for identification as a rule. You've seen how the seed head emerges from within the sheath of a flag leaf. As soon as a spikelet gets out into the open air, it starts to flower. What that means is that grasses flower from the top to the bottom. And if you think about the rest of the plant kingdom, the more usual thing is for them to flower progressively out towards the tips, and new growth is always being put out towards the tips, growing tips of the plant. So grasses are the reverse of most other sorts of flowering plants. They flower from the top down. That is really important. Okay, as the flowering progresses, the whole seed head ultimately protrudes from that top leaf that we call the flag leaf. And so the most mature of the seed heads that you will see on a plant or amongst a group of plants within that species will have their seed head protruding more than their peers above their flag leaves. So if I was wanting to see whether a crop of a particular species has ripe seeds, either because I want to harvest the seed or because I want to know whether Chilean needlegrass has got some ripe seed, in which case it will be a disaster to mow it, what people do, then you need to check for ripe seed. And the first ripe seeds will be found on a seed head, which, as you compare amongst the peers, will be protruding to the maximum extent above their flag leaves. And the ripest seeds on that seed head will be the ones at the very top. So I would be going through my stand of that species, looking for maybe the highest, tallest of the stems, and you'll find that typically the stem that has the seed head or inflorescence protruding furthest above its flag leaf will be one of the taller specimens. Then I go to the top of that, pluck out a seed, and I'll show you the technique that it involves using your thumbnail to squeeze the grain-bearing part of the seed, squeezing with your thumbnail against your forefinger and seeing how solid it feels. We'll do that tomorrow. Okay, so that's the way I would look for whether seeds are ripe. It won't work though for Vulpea myuros. We've already talked about Vulpeas. And it won't work for Tribolium. At least sometimes Vulpea myuros and Tribolium acutiflorum. The other Tribolium species I haven't ever seen. They're so rare. But these particular species, their inflorescences either will only barely pop out of the flag leaf or quite commonly not at all. So the base of a ripe seed head in these species may actually still be tucked into the sheath that is immediately underneath them. That's a really useful identifying feature, particularly if you reckon you've got a Vulpea species and you want to know whether it's myuros as opposed to one of the other species. Okay, any questions on that ripening process? No, I'm going to progress because we've only got 23 minutes to go. Grass seeds are one of the, well, it's almost the most definitive of features of the whole grass family. The relevant character being that, with very few exceptions, the seed of a grass comprises a grain which is shed tucked into at least one husk, usually two or sometimes more. Whereas with sedges, members of the sedge family and members of the rush family, gnat rushes, they all have naked grains, no husks surrounding them. Grass seeds include husks as a dispersal mechanism and possibly also to protect them a little bit from insect damage, but certainly to aid dispersal, as I will demonstrate presently. So it's a really important feature of grass seeds. There are, however, a couple of sorts of grass where the seeds are shed naked, and they are the Sporobolus species, whose grains at maturity pop out of the spikelets and sit there by stickiness. And when they get wet, particularly in suburban areas, any dog that walks past gets covered with these sticky seeds and disperses the seeds that way until the dog gets washed. So they have a different dispersal mechanism from the rest of the grass family. And some Eragrostis species also, as they shed their husks, they sort of alternate between shedding a husk and shedding a grain, shed a husk, shed a grain. So they sometimes don't follow the standard rule for a grass. Now, grass seeds are commonly so densely packed inside the seed head that you'll have trouble even seeing them. And I want to encourage you to get into the habit that whenever you see a seed head with really dense structure inside of it, so you can't really make out what the heck are the spikelets and so on, flex it. I'll demonstrate. I'll just have to stop sharing my screen and I'll change the camera and I will show you with maybe spear grass. There's oats. There's spear grass. I had everything really neat this morning, and after picking them up and putting them down, it's all become a tangled mess. Where is my wallaby grass seed? I've got a whole lot more there. I'll get a fresh one out of the bag. Okay, here is a wallaby grass. I won't tell you which because we're going to try identifying this using that identification key next Wednesday. Now, as I look at this, it's got spikelets in there, but it's hard to see what is a spikelet. A spikelet, one way of thinking about it is that it'll be the bits out on the ends of the branches, but I can't easily see the branches because it's all got stuff packed in too tightly. But if I flex this, then I start to see branching. And I would like the focusing to be a bit better. That's better. Now I can see that there are branches. And if I pick on one of those branches and I then flex it, now I can see the individual spikelets out on the ends of their branches. Another trick is that it's often easier to look at the top of a seed head or inflorescence because there tends to be shorter branching and less crowding at the top of an inflorescence of most species. So if I flex that, then pretty quickly I'm starting to see the spikelets on their individual stalks, or pedicels as they'd be called. In most of botany, a pedicel means the stalk of a flower. In this case, it's the stalk of a spikelet. It's just a convention that we use that same term. Okay, so if you have a look at your specimens that you've collected, you may have collected a grass whose seed head is really dense. This morning, somebody collected a Yorkshire fog, and Yorkshire fog at maturity, or a very young one, is really densely packed, and you've really got to flex it in order to see the different bits. And I'm seeing people handling their specimens. This is good to see. And you'll find that those grasses that have really densely packed spikelets will often also, will often widen the seed head when they flower. Flowering of a grass mostly happens in the morning. I'm aware of one wallaby grass species, or is it two, that flower almost entirely late in the afternoon. Most grasses flower in the mornings. Hopefully we'll see some flowering tomorrow, but it might be a bit late in the day. Actually, the humidity might mean that they will keep flowering a little later in the day. Flowering of a seed head, depending on the species and the weather at the time, may take a few days. Sometimes it will happen all in one day, starting at the top and working its way down, typically a few days though. And on the inflorescences that are really densely packed, for most of the time, at that period of a few days, the branches will fan out. And so you can see a single species looking quite different in its seed head, depending on whether it's undergoing this anthesis, as botanists call it, the process of shedding and capturing pollen to allow fertilization to occur. So flexing is a really important technique to practice, and we'll get a bit of practice with that out in the field together. Any questions? You're muted, Jeanette.
There we go. Sorry, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I've got a specimen and I have no idea what it is, I'll be honest. But the seed heads have almost twisted around themselves at the end. So it's almost impossible to be able to flex it or pull it apart without actually pulling the specimen apart.
I had the spear grass a minute ago. Oh, there it is. Oh, no, it's not. I've got one here. Here's one I prepared earlier. Spear grasses become really tangled. So I'm wondering whether you've got a situation like this. Can you show me, Jeanette?
Yeah, I can. Hang on, I'm just trying to get a background. So I'm trying to get the best bit to show you. So,
yeah, it's either a spear grass or a needle grass. And all the awns have done their thing. I'm going to show you that in a big way in a couple of minutes. I hope. Oh yeah, we've got quarter of an hour. I better accelerate. But yes, I'll show you what's going on there. Here's a tip for people who collect specimens of spear grass or needle grass. You need to get them into a plastic bag pronto, because as soon as they dry out, they become a tangled mess, as you've experienced, Jeanette. And once if you want to identify them after you've taken them out of the plastic bag. If you want to preserve them as a specimen, you need to get them into a plant press immediately, or as soon as you can, so that the awns, as those bristles are called, held in place and don't just become a tangled mess.
Yep. So the twisting is obviously a result of the drying out process, is that right?
Yes, you'll see that in a minute.
Excellent. Thank you. That was all for me.
Anything else? Okay, then I will move on, as I don't want to run over time. Okay, so we've done the flexing bit. Now, if you give me a grass seed, in the vast majority of cases, I will tell you what the species is. In the exceptions, like in some POAs, I'll tell you which of the small number of species of POA it would be. Some other species, I might only narrow it down to 2 or 3 species. But as a rule, you give me a grass seed and I'll tell you what the species is, because grass seeds are just that distinctive. So grass species are really important because of the way they look and because of their sizes. I mentioned before that the ligule and the collar area in general is one of only 2 areas of a grass plant that you can rely on having their standard typical dimensions and appearance, regardless of growing conditions or stage of development once they're formed. The spikelet is the other part of the plant, and the grass seeds reside in the spikelets. So grass seeds you can rely on to be pretty close to their typical size. There might be a little variation of the species between, say, the mallee and higher rainfall areas, but you can rely on a grass seed to retain those useful properties of size and general appearance. Once the seeds on most grass plants have been shed, what's left behind are pairs of husks, which are called glumes. There are some exceptions, such as the barley grasses that we looked at before, and I explained how the whole seed head or inflorescence disintegrates bit by bit, so that you're left with no glumes, no nothing, just the top of the stem. So there are a few exemptions, but by and large, there's these pairs of husks that are left behind after the grass seeds have fallen. And within that pair of grass seeds, I'll forget that for a moment. Let me show you a photograph here and then do a little party trick for you. here's a photograph of some seeds of spear grasses, and there's a wallaby grass there. That's Ritidosperma fulvum there. I can see it's so fluffy, it's got to be fulvum. Here's some speargrass seeds. Now, the quality of the image that you see won't be quite as good as I'm seeing, but if I look here, and this was at Lockwood, by the way, for Ross and Carla, and I can see the grain-bearing part of a seed here, vertical, and there is its awn or bristle coming straight up. It's a bit hard to see where it goes, but I reckon it corresponds with this wavy bit here. In fact, we call this a sickle-shaped awn on this speargrass seed. We've got the grain-bearing part, the broader part. That's the lemma, the part that you can see. And we've got like the shaft of the spear, if you can think of it like that, or the handle of the sickle. And then we've got the gracefully curved part of the awn. This handle of the sickle, if you like, is twisted like a piece of rope or a barber's shop pole, that sort of thing. And I can see that that one's vertical, and you'll see why it gets vertical in a minute. I can see another one here. There is the head of one of these sickles, or the end of the handle, and it's stuck down in a little crack or crevice in the soil there, a micro crack. It's got a shaft there, and it might be this awn with its long wavy bit there. And it turns out that more than half of Victorian grass species have awns that, when they dry out, have a lower part. And when a botanist talks about below or lower and bottom and so on, they're talking about the part that's more closely attached to the root system of the plant. And, you know, these things, it was the glooms were wrapped around this grain-bearing part here. So I'd say the bit that's in the soil is the base of the seed. Now I've lost where my sentence was going. These awns have a twisted part, and then a kink, and then a non-twisting part. And there is a very good reason for that, which I will now demonstrate. I've got to stop sharing, and I'll do my little party trick for you. Now, somebody is sending me text messages. I don't put it on Do Not Disturb, simply in case there is somebody from the course who needs to contact me. No, that's all okay. Now, I've got some seeds that I collected, as you might have done on your oat plant. You might have got some oat seeds, and I'll put them on my hand. Right, I've got an oat there. I'll get some oats. I'll get, oh, there's a kangaroo grass seed. I'll put a kangaroo grass seed on my hand, and got some wallaby grasses that have just landed on the table, and I might just get a pinch of sweet vernal grass seeds, which I've got over here. I'll put them on my hand as well. And I have to do this fairly quickly. They're going to change very quickly, particularly once I spray a bit of water on them. Here are my seeds. Now, I've got a little atomizer here, and I'm going to spray some water on these things, and we'll see what happens. Look at those sweet vernal grass seeds go. They may jump. Sometimes they'll jump clear off my hand. The kangaroo grass is going. I haven't wet the oat enough yet. Oh. Whoops. That was me with the water, not the oat seed. Now everybody's muted it, so I'm not hearing the gasps of amazement when you see what is happening. I would like you to imagine, thank you. I'd like you to imagine these things having fallen on the ground as they would. And you'll notice that the seeds have got a point on them. Nearly all grass seeds do. And you'll see that they've got hairs that point back away from that point. Those that don't have hairs, if you look really closely, or if you feel them, you'll find that they've got little shark's tooth sort of projections on them that mean or explain why, if you try pulling a grass seed out of your socks, they don't want to come out the way they went in. They've got to keep on in the same direction as they went in. And so not only do these seeds wriggle around in the undergrowth or through fur and feathers, but they also have a sense of purpose. And once they get tangled up in something or reach a little micro crevice in the soil or in moss or something like that, they will keep on wriggling around. They won't go backwards. And the awns, every time they get wet, will do this. Then they'll dry out and go back to their previous state. So they're continually going backwards and forwards, wriggling. And they'll keep wriggling. And just think about the angle there. If they get stuck in a particular spot, as the awn turns around like a propeller, it will lift the seed into a more vertical position. It'll keep on doing that like a crank handle sort of thing until the seed has wedged itself into a more vertically oriented position so that it will get into the soil better. And it turns out that within a couple of weeks of these grass seeds getting onto the ground, they have found their way into the soil where they are protected from fire and animals, including ants eating them. Well, that's enough for that. If only I could get them all off my hands. So this is happening around us with the majority of grass species in Victoria, which I find amazing. They have these remarkable dispersal mechanisms, as well as things like those seed heads that snap off and blow around on the wind. Now, we've only got 5 minutes, so whilst you're in a state of amazement from all that, I'm going to share my screen and try finishing off the remaining slides. Okay. Now, the spikelet is the term that we use for the glooms, which are nearly always in a pair. On ryegrasses, they only have one gloom per spikelet, but other species will have a pair of glooms, and there can be one or more than one seed produced inside the glooms. A speargrass or a needlegrass, or any one of the members of those two genera, or in the genus Agrostis, or a whole range of other genera, there's only ever a single seed per spikelet. That is, you've got a pair of glooms and just one seed in it. And Jeanette, I think you might have, no, who was it that got a speargrass and said that it was different because it only had the one? Was that Rose? I'm trying to remember. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So there are those genera within the grass family that only ever have one. All the other genera never have one. So there's a clear split within the grass family between the different genera. In fact, also between the tribes. It tends to be something that's consistent within a tribe. Okay, here's a picture of a wallaby grass going through that anthesis thing. So we've got the pair of glooms with a purple color coating, and we've got a seed there, another one, and so on. So there's about 5 or 6 there. Now, the branching in a seed head is really important for identification. And you might have collected as one of your very different grasses from those 3 that I sent you searching for, something like a paspalum or a couch or a windmill grass like this one, where the branches of the seed head have spikelets arranged in neat, orderly rows with little, if any, pedicel or individual stalk on the spikelets. So when you see these sorts of structures, it really narrows down the identity. And that's one of the characters that's used in the key to Victorian grasses that I will give you. Then there are grasses whose spikelets have no stalks at all, no pedicels. So here's a common wheatgrass, a native species, Anthosacne scabra, which I'll show you tomorrow. As long as we don't get rained out, we'll have to retreat from lightning. And ryegrasses is another group. And then there are the so-called panicles, which cover the rest of the grass family. We'll look for those tomorrow. Kangaroo grass we'll talk about tomorrow, but it's very distinctive in its inflorescence structure. And I'll cover all these things tomorrow, but I do want to give you a crash course in wallaby grasses and spear grasses with 2 minutes to remain. Wallaby grasses in general look something like this. They vary a little bit and they're not all in the Alps like that, but they generally look roughly like that when they're ripe, and they have seeds that are typically somewhat like you see here. You'll see that there are different amounts of hair on the various seeds. And it's to a large degree the shape of the seed head, like these bristles and the hairs and so on, that allow you to identify a wallaby grass one from another. But you need to know how to identify something as a wallaby grass to start with. Why they call wallaby grasses, I'm still not sure, but somebody told me that they thought they were called wallaby grasses because if you hold a seed like this, they look a little bit like a wallaby with a couple of legs down there and a tail. I thought, that's creative. I wonder what they're on. And then somebody else said they thought they were called wallaby grasses because if you hold the seed this way up, it's like a wallaby's head with the tip of the snout there, a couple of ears, and you can imagine the eyes being there. And I thought, I wonder what they're on. That's pretty potent. But then I thought, wallabies do not have a horn attached in between their 2 ears, but unicorns do. I would like to call these unicorn grasses because that terminology will allow me to communicate with you when we're out in the field. If I tell you to have a look for hairs at the tip of the unicorn snout, you'll know I'm talking about down here. And if I say, look for where the bend is in the unicorn's horn, you'll know I'm talking about this. And if I talk about, look how long the bristle is on the tip of the unicorn's ear, you'll know what to look for. If I tell you, look at the back of the unicorn's head for the palea, as it's called, the husk that's behind this lemma, you'll know to turn around the other side and you'll see the rest of the thing that you can just see sticking up there in between the unicorn's 2 ears. So tomorrow I'm going to talk about unicorns. Do bring your wallaby grass key and I'll tell you about different wallaby grass species. So wallaby grasses are identifiable just by having that shape of seed that looks a bit like or can be interpreted as a unicorn's head. Another thing that is distinctive is that the base of the unicorn's horn, or the coiling part of the horn, is not twisted like a barber's shop pole or rope. We're getting into Christmas, so think curling ribbon. They twist by having a flat ribbon-like piece of tissue that coils, not by something like you'd find on this 5-horn speargrass, a pentapogon, not an ostrostarter, a pentapogon, but it would be the same for a speargrass or a needlegrass or numerous other species of grass in Victoria. That's what most grasses do when they have one of these twisting horns, but not wallaby grass, nor, as it happens, the silky bluegrass or Dichanthium sericium. Now, Ross and Carla, you're up at Lockwood near Bendigo. You've got a fair bit of silky bluegrass in your landscape. You'll find that they have the same sort of curling ribbon sort of affair. Now, just to show you how they work, here is a video speeded up by a factor of 4. I've plucked this seed out of its spikelet, and within seconds I had to get it onto a dob of blue tack on top of a needle and set the camera going to capture this. And at this point I sprayed it with some water, so you see that horn going backwards a little bit. And there it goes again. I'll let you just have one more look at it. So it starts off with these hairs flush against the surface of that lemma, as it's called, the face of the unicorn. But as it dries out, within seconds, those hairs fan out, which makes it easier to identify the species. and the awn wriggles around like a propeller. Okay, that will do for that. We'll see, as I said, somewhere between 6 and 9 species of wallaby grass tomorrow, I reckon. I hope we'll have time to do 6. We'll certainly see quite a few. Spear grasses are the other big group of native grasses in Victoria. Well, Poas is pretty big too, but less frequently encountered in diversity. Spear grasses and wallaby grasses are where the action really is. And so I'm not surprised that so many of you said that in doing this course, you want to be better at recognising your spear grasses and wallaby grasses. I'll show you them tomorrow, but the thing that I wanted to anticipate in that regard is that, particularly if we don't see any needlegrass, which would be lovely, I wanted to show you what happens in the bottom right here, where the awn, and you'll see it's twisted like rope there, joins on to the lemma part. The grain develops in here. You'd expect that that's where the grain would be. And at the base of the awn of the needle grasses, but not the native spear grasses, there is this rim of tissue that has little teeth on the top, or in some other needlegrass species, it will have quite long hairs sticking horizontally outwards on this orientation. And that's called a corona, which is the Latin, Spanish, and Portuguese word for a crown, because it looks a little bit like a crown on its side in this case. Now, spear grasses will either have nothing at all around the base there, or they will have hairs, as in this case. So this is a typical spear grass, and we'll see this species tomorrow, Osteostipa bigeniculata. So that's something to look forward to tomorrow. And we are now finished. Oh, we're 5 minutes over time. Things could be worse. I often go more than 5 minutes over time, but then I still have to tell you what to do to prepare for tomorrow. So I'm sorry if you were really relying on leaving at 4 o'clock, but it's been worth it, hasn't it? I hope I'll get some thumbs up or something on that.
Definitely worth it.
Good, good. At least some people are finding it good. Now, my information for tomorrow. Number 1, there are no toilets, and that's true of all of our field trip sites. Tomorrow's is furthest from the nearest toilets. I know at Toowoomba Vale there's a service station. I think students in the past have told me that they've resorted to going to the service station.
There's some across the road, I think, too, Graham, as well at Toowoomba Vale.
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, yes, on a Thursday afternoon, they probably will be open. Oh, look, it depends. COVID restrictions. Don't know. You could be right. You could be right. But I wouldn't rely on it. And there aren't many trees or bushes around either. Okay. Right. So we're meeting at 1:30. Park on Missons Road facing east. We need to all be on the one side. Don't drive right over onto the native grassland. It is nationally significant. It is a narrow gravel road, but we can take up almost half of the road and not cause too much environmental harm. Occupational health and safety, we've got to be prepared for all manner of weather, and we will have to retreat into our cars if there's any lightning coming. There's going to be extreme ultraviolet, and I'm photosensitive at the moment because I've been put on antibiotics for a tick bite in East Gippsland. I won't say any more. Make sure that you have stout boots, as there may be snakes, and also when you bring your boots, or you can use gaiters too, but whatever footwear you bring, make sure it doesn't have any dirt and seeds on it. I don't want to introduce any pathogens or seeds to a site of national significance. If you're bringing specimens, bring them in a bag so that they don't spill seeds. You're welcome to bring specimens for me to identify. Bring your notes, particularly the wallaby grass seeds, the wallaby grass key and notes. The other ones, yeah, bring your key grass species of Victoria notes. Yeah, the wild grasses of southeastern Australia notes, bring them if you like. You may want to take a plastic bag to take specimens, which would have to be with my approval, because I don't want you collecting some of the rare species of grass that we will see tomorrow. if you want to collect a particular grass species, unless I've already told you that it's introduced, in which case you can fill your bag and fill your boot. Ask me if you want to collect a native grass species. That's all I can think of. Oh, COVID, the other aspect of OH&S. If you have any symptoms that could be COVID, please don't come, get tested. If you're a primary or secondary contact, I'm hoping the Department of Health and Human Services or whoever tells you that you're a contact will tell you what you can and can't do. And if you think or you are told not to come to something like a session tomorrow, please don't. But hopefully we'll all be healthy, and I expect that's the likely outcome. Any questions?
I have one, Graham. Just Jeanette. I ordered my lens and tweezers a good week and a half ago, but they haven't arrived yet. Is there anything I can borrow just for tomorrow? Hopefully they'll be here by the next session.
Good point. I have a class set of hand lenses. Every now and then somebody forgets to hand one back, and I might not have the full number for the 17 students, but I got pretty close to that, I think. With COVID-19, you would need to take with you and do take a plastic bag, even if you don't bring a specimen. I just remembered, take a plastic bag, because I'm going to give you specimens for next week. So do take a plastic bag, the bigger the better, within reason. Now, what was the question again?
I was just in regard to being able to borrow a hand lens and just the tweezers tomorrow. I should have them by next week, hopefully, but I think COVID's held up the mail a little bit for.
Yes, don't bring hand lens. Don't bring those sharp tweezers. Anybody? Oh, yeah, maybe you could. You'd have to make sure that the sharp points are well protected, because they are like needles. And out in the field and handling things, you could easily jab yourself or someone else. They are potentially dangerous. A number of times I've drawn blood with those. But they can be handy for holding things. If you're really dexterous, you could do it with your fingers. But hand lenses are certainly good. If you've got one, bring it. If you've got faucets or tweezers, fine tweezers, you can bring them. They might well be useful, but carry them in a box or something that means that they're not going to stick into you. And also perhaps brightly colour something on it like a ribbon, so that when it's dropped in the grass or put down, you'll be able to find it again. Anything else? No. Then we are done at 4:10. I'll look forward to seeing you at 1:30 tomorrow on Missons Road at Toolern Vale. See you later.
Thanks, Graham.
Thanks, Graham.
Thanks, Graham.
Thank you.
Thanks, Graham.
Thank you.